So dudes, my name's Gwen and I yap about Rainbow Six Siege. Today's yap session is about the biggest myth the game still seems to be embroiled in. The purpose of this video is to debunk the myth that irritates me probably more than any of the narratives out there that exist for Rainbow Six Siege, and why the game is in the state it's in, and we're gonna add some more context to the situation. So the general gist is that a lot of people don't like Pro League because esports bad, corporate bad, blah, 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 blah. Anytime Ubisoft decides to do something to the game that people don't like, they look at it and they go, this is Pro League's fault. My favorite character was good, now they're bad because somebody in Pro League who's bad at the game, which is just a hilarious statement to say out loud, got mad because they got slammed and they're sore losers. And they got pissed off. They told Ubisoft, nerf this person. And nothing is probably more a better example than this. The Jaeger nerfs that happened over the course of many years. A lot of the problem, right, that had to do with why Jaeger was powerful had nothing to do with what the balancing team was doing back then, where they just kept nerfing the gun over and over and over again, and then finally they got around to nerfing the gadget, and then the problem that they, surmised eventually decided to go away. But Ubisoft does, in the grand scheme of things, consider a broad range of players when they do make balance changes, and I'm not just saying that to say that, I'm saying that because that's what the changes are. We have proof of that, and we can talk about that and cite specific examples. What people seem to be more irritated by is the actual balancing approach that Ubisoft implements. Ubisoft does have a rap sheet of rolling out pretty unpopular changes, but those changes are done with a different philosophy than I think what the player base often realizes is. So I'm going to provide evidence that Ubisoft considers a broad range of players when making balancing changes. And what better place to start than their official stance from the company website. So this was year 8. This was basically their statement of intent for balancing when they had this big culture shift, when, our boy Harry got shot, and they said, we a real man's game. We got military tactical drama up in this bitch. And basically, as you know, Ubisoft is filled with liars that participate in 5-dimensional chess tricks to trick their hapless audience into not hating them, despite the fact that every time they open their mouth, people hate them anyway. You understand what I'm trying to say here, I think. It probably has something to do with the fact that they're a massive gaming company, not necessarily that they did something that people don't like, because no matter what they say, people are going to get really irritated with them because that's just the state of gaming and social media discourse now. Everybody is pissed off 24/7 and they got their panties in a bunch all the freaking time. So all this to preface, basically, you have to take them at their word, and if you don't believe them, then I guess that's fine. I'm not really sure what reason you would have to not believe them when they're talking here, because what they're saying is consistent with how they actually approach the game. I think that disagreeing with this approach can be one thing, but to say that this is, not evidence of them performing a certain kind of philosophy with their balancing, I think is a little bit silly. So basically what they said here was that in Rainbow Six Siege, every operator is an expert with a focused proficiency that gives them strength, very strong in the right situations, but with flaws in the wrong ones. So basically, right tool for the right job. Continuing, our philosophy is all about providing you with the right set of tools to confront very specific situations. So they said outright from the very start, and furthermore, in their own words, we aim to reduce the strong, jack of all trades operators. So these guys want you to be incentivized to work together, and they want you to have a very specific role, because if you're too strong, then you're not going to rely on your teammates for things. And that's, that's consistent with how a tactical shooter is usually balanced. If you want a good tactical shooter, you should have it in such a way that you can't just constantly make solo plays all the time, because if you're able to use a character that is able to make solo plays and be self-sufficient 100% of the time, that means that they're not interfacing with the other components of the game. Now, is Ubisoft dumb for attempting to create this player engagement loop? I'm not really sure. Evidently, a lot of people are very unhappy with Ubisoft and Rainbow Six Siege in general, which is really weird because people keep clicking on my videos. I'm not sure why. I can't change people's consumption habits. So, but aside from that, it's really clear that a lot of people don't, think Ubisoft is being honest when they talk about this stuff. And I want to provide examples, you know, showcasing that this is exactly what they try to do. Buck is a very good example of, you know, maybe a little bit too much of an emphasis on this philosophy where, you know, you took away frag grenades, and that was a very infamous change that took place a long time ago. And now you've taken away his Gon 6, which was another tool that he had to leverage his gunfighting ability, combo up, getting the Buck stuff right with the vertical, and then maybe shooting some gadgetry from below. That was a nice little gameplay loop that he had in addition to the verticality. Another good example of this would be Nook. Nook got dialed back in a considerable amount of respects to the point where you have to, you know, really kind of have decent mechanical skill to leverage the FMG9 because that thing tends to kick like a mule sometimes if you're not too careful. Zero is probably going to be up next on the chopping block because I made a video talking about how self-sufficient and versatile he is. Sorry about that. And, you know, there seems to be a pattern, especially with YouTube content, where content creators will try to find whatever is the most effective or the most powerful character in a game, right? Because it's going to drive engagement, because people are going to watch the video, they're going to be curious about that. And so that ends up kind of exacerbating the problem where it's like, oh yeah, this is content creators' fault too, because they point out things and then, you know, Ubisoft is like, wow, you know, thanks for letting us know. I do believe that there is a component of it to that as well. But basically, the moment that somebody is able to fulfill a variety of situations, that character is probably going to get nerfed. Now, the reason this doesn't really benefit the pro community is because when this happens, the pro community actually tends to get pretty irritated because this emphasis on competitive balancing is not to make it easier for the professional community, it's to make it more difficult for the professional community. At one point, Ubisoft, infamously, I might add, stated that if the professional scene is upset about something, that probably means that we're doing something right. So which one is it? Is Ubisoft, you know, catering to these people, or are they trying to make a competitive game that has a number of different moving parts that people can appreciate from a wide different variety of skill sets and life experiences? I think it probably has something to do with the latter. I don't think it's necessarily because they all congregate behind closed doors with candlelight and black hooded robes and, you know, they sacrifice a Redditor to explain why they need to get rid of the ACOG for the 5 millionth time. I don't think it's that. I think they just, you know, they have a philosophy and people can like it or they can dislike it, but they follow through with it and they stick to their word, even if people don't like it. So it's a very hotly debated topic. It goes as far back as 5 years ago when it was discussed on Reddit. There was a thread that actually called the solution that ultimately came through to keep Nomad from being totally overpowered when she was first released. Not a lot of people know that Nomad was basically an entry fragger when she first came out because you could go up to somebody, hit the thingamajig, right? Hit the air jab, shoot it, and then it would detonate instantly. So you could air jab people out of cover for free with no repercussions. And it was like, you know, it was just way too much. So eventually, Nomad got to the state where she is right now, where she's not overpowered, but she is strong, right? Her air jabs have a little sound that indicate their presence. Her job as a crowd controlling operator is still there, but it doesn't let her just walk into sight and entry frag people out of positions, which is how she was when she was first released, which was overpowered. Now, it doesn't matter if Timmy, 15, who hasn't done his math homework, you know, we can only do so much for him. We can only hope that he decides to take it upon himself to embrace the jolly cooperation of competition, or he could just write another Reddit thread complaining about Ubisoft when his favorite character gets nerfed, even though the character was overpowered and was pissing everybody off, not just Timmy. So, yeah, we could just... I wish it was easier, man. I really do. Like, the game is a competitive game. It has heritage with Counter-Strike. I don't know what the solution is, but all I can say, you know, because I have a platform, is it's definitely not to make Pro League comfortable. I can assure you that, because sometimes, you know, when they make a change, it's not necessarily because Pro League got upset about it. It's probably because the community got upset about it, and then they responded to the community. Good example of this was Solus and Fenrir. According to their data, Solus and Fenrir did not trip any switches. They were not giving the staff any red flags in the data sheets. Solus's win rate was competitive but not overpowered, so was Fenrir's. The reason that those operators got nerfed was because they caused a frustrating gameplay loop that seemed to reduce the skill gap in competitive play. So that wasn't necessarily to make the Pro League scene feel better. it was to make everybody feel like these characters were less oppressive when they were on the attacking side. When you're on defense, it's great. It's great to just throw a bunch of bulletproof pieces of utility you can activate at any point you want through walls that are basically forever flashbangs. That sounds fun, but it's really, really annoying to deal with on attack, and there's not a lot of counterplay options. So, that's what they ended up doing. Now, the impact on the data sheet did not reflect how people felt because, why? People don't like having their agency taken away in a video game. Good example of this was Deadlock. Deadlock has that ability in Valorant where she can basically, crowd control somebody by force through walls. And the only way to get rid of the cocoon, right, is to get shot out of it by a teammate. A lot of people looked at that and they were like, this is ridiculous. This is so much. Oh my gosh, it reduces agency. And she has a pretty comparable win rate to the rest of everybody else in the roster. So it just comes to show you that just looking at something in a vacuum, right? Just looking at the demonstration of an ability on Twitter doesn't necessarily mean that that character in reality, that design choice is going to have the effects that you think it's going to have. The thread also continued to discuss how, for instance, Caveira is an example of an operator that can't really be balanced into being competitive without being overpowered because her entire gameplay loop is inherently skill-based. It's very binary, right? You down somebody and then you get the interrogation or you don't. If you fiddle with that, then it gets into some really, really nasty kind of territory that you don't really want to tread. If she was more difficult to use, she'd be more abrasive to average players. However, she dominates in low elo, right? Because people in low elo don't have good spatial awareness. Like me. So, should we nerf her? No, because it's already hard enough to play decently with Caveira to begin with. So if we nerf her because she is operating in this environment, right, and people don't like it, does not mean that the entire population is going to be affected in a positive way by that change. So you have to consider where multiple people are coming from, and I think that's more in line with how Ubisoft approaches the game. Another good example of a set of changes that made it more difficult for the professional community, not easier, was the Azami nerf. Azami was capable of creating her own bulletproof map terrain at the click of a button, which allowed her to construct the site however she wanted with no effective counter besides explosives. Now that required the attacking lineup to allocate resources to dealing with her. So for instance, a really strong example of this was Bank, top floor. You could throw an Azami barrier on the chandelier that sits in between the window angle that's facing towards the site from outside of the building and the actual site itself that looks into like Banana and Trump. So the only counter that you had to that, right, to basically constructing the map in a way that, it wasn't intended to be designed, because that's kind of what it was to bring an explosive. And then you had to take that resources away, right, from your pool of destructive utility to deal with this 1 in a million kind of situation. And so if you comboed her up with a castle, it meant that some of the sites were essentially incapable of being approached without having to go down a choke point. And that made the defender side of meta even stronger at a time where the topic was heavily debated, where a lot of the casual community was upset because the game is too defender-sided and everybody's running around like Call of Duty, and this game's Call of Duty with abilities now. I quit. This sucks. And it's all Pro League's fault. It's not Pro League's fault. Ubisoft just read the room a little bit wrong when they added Azami to the game because they wanted to add a character that did something different, that spiced things up, and they succeeded at that. But what they ended up doing was actually the right approach, because to counteract Azami, she was given a counterplay option. So counterplay options are good because that means that skilled players have a solution to the problem that doesn't nullify the existence of the character, right? The other player still has agency to respond to the counterplay option. So players could dump a magazine into the barrier to eventually get rid of it, and then eventually that, effectiveness got enhanced. So this was a decent way to get around the issue. It required you to expose yourself with a sustained pre-fire. So it wasn't like the Kibas were completely useless. It was a counterplay option that didn't completely negate her effectiveness, but it was very much needed. This was a novel solution to the issue that gave attackers another avenue of skill expression while letting Azami remain a strong character. So when balancing is done in a game like this, what often gets ignored is the fact that Rainbow Six Siege is a game with a very strong distinction between attacking and defending characters. So you're going to design these characters in completely different ways, and if you provide a counterplay option, that is a counterplay option that you can have on the other side, right? So when a character gets nerfed, that's a buff to the character that is fighting them on the other team. I don't think any other tactical shooter on the market approaches it this way. So often, a nerf can actually be a blessing on the opposite side. And a lot of people don't really take that into consideration, right? They see a nerf, and then they get mad, and then they complain on Reddit, and then they probably make more money than me, right? Because my stupid ass wants to say what I think about the situation, and as it turns out, I'm really bad at lying. So the moment that I say, hey guys, wow, isn't the Pro League, don't those guys suck? You know, it tends not to go very well. And so that's, you know, one of the unfortunate situations here is that the game is a hero shooter. When you're balancing a hero shooter like this, it can feel like their toys are getting broken, which leads to frustration. And in the past, I've been very critical of some of the decision-making processes that Ubisoft follows. Often, not necessarily, you know, maybe because I might disagree or agree with the balance change per se, but a lot of the time because I'm like, hey Ubi, we need to adopt some discretionary press awareness, you know? Like, there's no right way to approach this problem because it's inevitably gonna piss off some people regardless of what you do. So the only thing that Ubisoft can do is try to make changes that everybody can get behind, which is a much better representation of their philosophy than just Pro League is bad. Because I don't think it is just Pro League is bad. I don't think Pro League is necessarily bad or good as an entity, because tons of FPS games have had esports scenes and still have esports scenes. Games way back in the day before it became a talking point on YouTube had esports scenes and nobody cared. Rainbow Six Siege is pretty much dead in the water without a competitive scene. It released with no single player for $60 back in 2015 in a day and age where the John Gun Guy game was starting to become a figment of yesteryear. Okay, those kinds of games were not really popular anymore in the market. Gaming was starting to spread its appeal to, you know, people who weren't just guys in their 20s and 30s. But, you know, I think the mob is right. I think the internet mob is right. We should just not make games anymore. All games should just stop being made if they have esports. What do you guys think of the myth that Ubisoft balances for Pro League? Do you still believe the Ron statement? Do you still, are you mad about the video? Let me know. Let me know why I'm wrong with no evidence or citations in the comments down below.